Welcome to the pod focusing on the aftermath and recovery from the devastating Palisades fires of January 2025. Journalist Joel Pollack, entrepreneur Oren Ezra, and construction expert Ron Goldschmidt serve up to the moment vital news and information, discuss the ongoing recovery efforts, and introduce us to the individuals and trades who are playing key roles in rebuilding our cherished communities. We're diving into the deep end and learning quickly how we can move forward together. We know the pain because we're living it. Real-time news, stories, resources, and insights on the ongoing recovery effort. Buckle up. We're three homeless guys.
Welcome to Three Homeless Guys, the podcast that talks about the Palisades fire and the rebuilding. I'm Joel Pollack here with Ron Goldschmidt and Oren Ezra. And this week we're going to be talking about the Woolsey Fire and how people rebuilt from that. Is it a model for Pacific Palisades, Malibu, Altadena, Pasadena? And great to be here as always, even in difficult circumstances. How are you guys doing?
We're doing good. The week is starting off with a bang. Lots of news. Your photos of the wildlife around the area really, honestly, actually depressed me today. Seeing those photos that you sent. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that and what you saw today.
All right, let me get to that then. So, Temescal Canyon and Topanga State Park. Very, very popular in the Pacific Palisades, very popular with people who come to visit the area. And I'm a big fan. I go there almost every week when we're at home, of course. And I went up a couple of weeks ago after the first rains to see the damage from the fire. And then we had a week of torrential rain last week. That would be the second week of February, with mud flows and debris and all kinds of changes, difficult weather conditions. There is still mud on Sunset Boulevard if you go in today. And I was curious to see what Temescal Canyon looked like. I imagined that there had been some landslides or some changes to the trail. Now, you're not allowed to go on the Temescal Canyon Trail. It says do not enter and all that. So I'm not recommending that anybody do this, but I did scout it out on Wednesday. I talked to the LA County Public Works people who are doing some very interesting work. Let me explain that work for a second. So if we could play the Temescal Canyon Dam restoration video, the first one, you'll see what they're doing. So just as background, these dams exist within the canyon. You can see that they have wood slats mounted on the dam with little holes between them, or large spaces between them, really. That's because the dams are there to let the water through, but to stop tree branches, sediment, rocks, anything that might flow downstream and either block the flow of the water or damage property downstream. Those dams were built decades ago, and over the years, they've basically been neglected. This is what I learned this week from the LA County Public Works engineers and officials who were there supervising the repair work. The sediment has built up so much that effectively these dams almost ceased to work. And with the mud flows after the rains last week, the mud and the branches and the boulders piled up so high that essentially the water was simply going over the top of the dam. So what they did was they started digging out, and you can see the second video there. They took large excavators, other earth-moving machines. They started digging out the sediment, mud, and placing wood slats, some of which were damaged in the fire, but most of which are simply very old. And so you had work crews in there replacing the slats. There are two dams. There's a lower one, which everybody passes on their walk into the canyon, and then there's a higher one, or an upper one, that you might miss if you didn't know it was there. It's just about 5 minutes walk further into the canyon. So that's the work they're doing there. But I found, as with many things, because I'm often the only resident of Palisades who's up there when police, fire, or public works crews are looking for information, I had to explain to them what the water flow was like and what the dams had been like over the last few years because they simply didn't know. I had to show them photographs on my phone and help the engineers understand what they were doing. And that was very interesting. And then I started walking into the canyon. So let me just show you a little bit of what I saw. And, we're going to have to do a whole episode on the environmental impact of the fires and the flooding. And of course, the flooding is worse because of the fires. There's no vegetation. We talked a little bit about that previously. But let's look at let's actually look at Temescal 3. That's the first video in terms of the location on the trail. And what you'll see here is a large floodplain that's just inundated with mud and rocks and boulders. If you see the palm fronds there of that palm tree, many of you who hike that trail will recognize that palm tree. It stood in a particular place at a bend in the stream of the canyon. Very beautiful part of the hike. You can see just how much has been destroyed. That mud, by the way, is a very solid mud. I'm told that the mud you get after a fire is not really permeable the way ordinary soil is permeable, partly because the ground is warm, and so the runoff is much worse because the water cannot get down into the earth, and it simply sweeps along the surface, taking things with it. Let's look at video number 2, Temescal 2. This is further up. Now, the trail has been completely obliterated almost everywhere. So the only way to move through the canyon is to walk up these waterfalls and climb over the boulders. And that's how I had to do it. I had to climb through the canyon along the waterfalls. It's not easy, and I don't recommend it, but I made it to the top without too many problems. And let's look at Temescal, the other video. This gives you another sense of what things look like. This shows you what I found at the end. This is, of course, the waterfall everybody likes to stop at. This is where the bridge used to be. Let's show that one more time. You can see where the bridge used to span that waterfall. Right there, you can see the two walls on either side. And much of that area is still intact, but the bridge, of course, has burned. In fact, when I went up there a couple of weeks ago, the wooden boards of the bridge were gone, but the steel frame was still there. The steel frame is now completely gone, washed downstream. Now, there was something else I found up there, which was really fascinating. And let's show this video. This is a bobcat that was simply sitting on the trail. And I was shocked to see it. It was shocked to see me. And there he is, or she. I didn't really get a sense of whether it's male or female. But you can see one more time, you can see just how thin this bobcat is. There's almost nothing for the bobcat to eat anymore, because most of the rodents and birds and so forth have either disappeared or gone somewhere else. There's very little vegetation for them to subsist on. So it's really tough for some of the wildlife. And I actually did get in touch with an animal welfare activist who made some effort to reach the bobcat. I don't know if she succeeded. I sent her a message and she didn't respond, so I hope she's okay. But we'll do a more extensive episode about that later. Let me just throw it to Ron and Oren. Do you guys have any reaction to that? I mean, that's just a little bit of what I saw.
Yeah, we were talking about it that we talked about it a couple of times. I think that for years nobody was cutting trees over here. The brush was not cleaned, and the whole idea was to save nature and to keep it as raw as possible. And the destruction that we see today that happened because of these fires, and we saw a lot of the videos that you put on. We saw a couple of videos from the ocean. Ron, what you sent earlier today. This is horrible. I don't know, we should definitely start talking about it. We should definitely get some information about the ocean. How long will it take the ocean to be cleaned? How long will it take these beautiful trails to be back? Is there anything we can do as a community? Because the more we talk about it, the more things coming up. I understand that the power over here is in our hands. The power over here is in the community hands, and we need to organize, and we need to be just like we're building our homes together right now. We need to get together and build these trails back. We need to get together, build, not build, but clean the oceans as soon as possible. Every rain that comes out is washing more and more debris into the ocean. Those are things that I think, as a community, we should get together and start taking care of it. Ron?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit disheartened by the fact that there's not a lot of active things being done right now about it. I feel like, as you said, probably some people should be working on that. I think we should have obviously like an in-depth episode about this, and we will. We will in the coming weeks. But I'd love to hear also later from Jamie about his experience with Woolsey and what the experience was from that perspective.
Let's get to that in a minute. Let's just run through a couple other items before we hit that. A couple of follow-up pieces of news. So we talked about insurance in the last episode. That was our most watched episode thus far. And people still have all kinds of problems with insurance companies. I've been learning a lot about how the insurance companies operate when it comes to itemization, when you have to list the items that you lost or that you want them to cover. And different companies are offering different arrangements. Now, the State Insurance Commissioner, Ricardo Lara, has encouraged the companies to just give people the full value of their personal property coverage, 100%. But most of the companies will give you a certain percentage. I think by state law or state regulation, they have to give you 30% immediately on demand, and then you can get the full 100% if you itemize everything. And that itemization is very difficult for people. It's emotionally difficult. Different companies give different percentages. So I'm told that USAA gives 75%, and if you want the whole 100%, you have to itemize everything. Farmers only gives you 30%. I have to get some of these numbers figured out, but it's really interesting to see the range here. One or two companies are already giving 100%. So that's something I think we'll have to talk about as well. And finally, another piece of news, the Steadfast LA organization, which is a nonprofit, and that's the one founded by Rick Caruso, who built the Palisades Village Mall. Steadfast LA is now offering ADUs, these prefabricated homes. I think they're 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. They're offering them for free to people with low incomes who own property in Pacific Palisades, Malibu, Altadena, Pasadena, but cannot afford yet to rebuild their homes. If you want to simply move onto your property, you can get one of these prefabricated homes, and they look pretty nice, actually. They look pretty good. I think they're available for purchase also if you don't fall into the low income category, and you can use it on your property as an additional dwelling unit, but they're giving them out. Big announcement from Caruso this week, and the whole purpose of this is to make sure people can move back in. They don't have to wait forever. Once it's safe to move back in, they can build the community again before they build the physical homes. And that might be a good segue to talk about the Woolsey Fire, because when we had Jamie Page on recently, she said that within the burn area of the Woolsey Fire, where she now lives, there are still people living in RVs on their lots. And while that was disappointing, at least they were back in the area. So, Ron, do you want to introduce our guest to talk about his experience with the Woolsey Fire?
Yeah, Jamie, is actually a friend of Oren's. Jamie's one of the first people that we met after the Palisades fire that was actually, very positive, optimistic about people coming back. So once we got to know Jamie a little bit, and Oren more than me, we figured out he's kind of got all the hacks for getting back in the property, building, rebuilding. And I thought, hey, let's go to the source. Let's find somebody who's been through exactly what we are going through. And ask him all the questions so we don't have to make the same mistakes, and also learn some of the lessons that he's gone through. So I'm really glad to introduce, and he'll introduce himself, Jamie. Jamie Ottilie.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks for having me, guys. Yeah, I'm a 30-year resident of Point Doom in Malibu. We lost our house in 2018. We're now back on our street. My street lost 26 out of 37 houses. Our end of the street was completely gone, like many of the neighborhoods you guys are seeing now. And at the time, it was really hard to understand how it would ever come back. We're 6 years, a little over 6 years out. And for the most part, the street's back. There are a couple houses that are finishing up. There's some, unfortunately, that had senior residents that turned over and are just getting built now. But the majority of this, you wouldn't know that everything had burned down. People are surprised when we tell them that the street was gone at this point. So it does recover. It does take time. It's interesting you brought up the ADUs and temporary housing for fires. I was at the Malibu Planning Commission meeting tonight, and that was the main reason I went to go speak. Fastest way to get people back on their properties is to give them the rights to put some sort of temporary dwelling there. And if you're not in the place where Rick Russo's charity's going to provide it for you, and you have to drop $250,000 on it, it's a stretch when you're underinsured. And so we're advocating actually to let our citizens keep them as guest houses afterwards, because like it makes no sense to spend that much money on your property and then subsequently end up having to have it hauled out, right? Basically, to get your final permit. If you keep it as a guest house, it can have a rental income stream. It can allow your family to expand, all those sorts of things. And that's really probably the hardest part in fires like this is almost nobody has enough ALE, alternate living expenses coverage. Policies are either time-based, and the state will force the insurance companies to pay for an extra year, maybe 2 years, but you're still talking about 3 years. And we're 6 years out from Wolsey, 37% of the houses are rebuilt. So it's longer than 3 years. We had a fixed dollar amount for ours. And I tried actually for the first 8 months to negotiate with the city and with my insurance company to let me buy a mobile home and drop it on my lot and keep it. Because it was easy to do the math, right? Like if I'm going to be out for 3 years and I only have this much money and I got to pay rent in West LA, which just went up 40% because 1,000 homes disappeared. That's really it. And communities die over this, right? You lose the fabric of the community, you lose the neighborhood, you lose kids at schools, like kids with or people with families move away, they enroll their kids in other districts, and they don't want to come back, right? If your kid does 3 years in another district, do you really want to force them to relocate and come back to where you were previously? And so the number one thing the municipalities can do is get people back on the properties as quickly as it's safe, or as quickly as possible, as soon as it's safe. So it's nice to hear, frankly, that there's a nonprofit that's focused on it, because there are a lot of people have a habit of assuming our zip codes are wealthy. That's not really true for the majority of people who live here. Most of us go to work every day, and need to live in the home that we're paying the mortgage and taxes on, in terms of being able to support our families. So these are good first steps for sure.
Jamie, I got a question for you. I'm going to throw you right in the fire here. So we're 6 weeks after the event for us. Looking back at that time period, the first couple of months of having the incidents, what do you wish now that you had known back then?
I think the first part is I wish I had a better idea of what the bottlenecks would really be, because if I look at that period of time, I spent an inordinate amount of time stressing out about things and trying to move things faster that didn't really matter. Like I was obsessed with debris removal, and trying to get it off my property. This fire, it's already moving much faster. Woolsey happened in November. Debris removal didn't start until May the following year. So it took 6 months before anybody was allowed to clear their lots. That whole period, I was losing my mind over it. And it kind of turns out like that's not really the bottleneck for getting your house rebuilt. It's frustrating because you want your land back and the rest of it, but it isn't really something that helps, right? There's that immediate desire to be working on something, but what you really need to do is get your plans, figure out what kind of house you build, who's going to build it for you, what the subcontractors are, who's designing it, whether or not you do your own permitting process, how much money you have to spend. I did quite a bit of the work on my own to save money. We did all of our own permits. We did half of the design work. I built my house in 3D before the architect ever built his little model of it.
Wait, how do you do that?
I run a video game company, so how I did that was allocated some staff to like, here are my plans, build this thing for me because I want to walk through it and
You got
understand
the
it.
video game
Yeah,
kids to build your house?
I did. I had my art team
Does it
build
look
my
like
house.
Minecraft, or is everything
No,
like cubicle?
it was pretty nice actually. And the architects nowadays, the architects can actually do that for you, right? If you work with a good digital architect, they'll get you a 3D walkthrough of your house, which is really effective. Um, but yeah, like the stuff that I was panicking about turned out not to be the problem. Like you mentioned the contents list, we went through all of that. I pushed it as far down the road as I could to do the list, and then eventually forced them to let me do like a roll up of categories instead of a list, and got 100%. But it was 30, and then it was 50, and then it was 65, and then it was 75, and then like eventually it was all of it.
So you had a total loss. I mean, your house burned down. You had
100%.
to.
Yeah, we had.
Well, let me ask a question. I mean, Ron and Oren are going through that right now. My house is still standing, but emotionally, because a lot of people are still just reeling from the impact of that, how does it feel 7 years later, having absorbed that loss? What does it feel like to you now?
Um, this sounds odd, but I think it really is became a net benefit for me psychologically and for my family in terms of where we ended up with our house and the rest of it. I'm not saying it was easy or not painful or difficult, but if I look at it in hindsight, like the journey was really educational. Finding yourself without any things is a really weird mental place to be. You guys are probably still in the middle of that. We rented a house that was fully furnished. People left us clothing and tea towels and silverware because they just went traveling. My family and I kept our lives down to like 2 carry-on suitcases for probably the first 9 months, and we kind of liked it. I mean, there was definitely that like, oh, it's so freeing. Um, there's something that comes with that. Um, I used to tell my friends it's sort of like somebody comes along and takes all your stuff, like all the things you love, the things that you got from your family, the things you thought you'd have forever, and then all the shit you didn't care about, or the boxes that you hadn't unpacked for 30 years since you moved the last time, and they left you a big pile of money. And it's not really enough money to replace all the things, but it's still enough money that like you're not really worried about things. Like if you need something, you can just buy it or have it, and then it makes you less attached to things. We still live a very minimalistic lifestyle from where we were previously. Our new house has very little storage. We don't have bookcases everywhere. None of us like knickknacks. We're very good at culling our kids' stuff and our stuff now. There's less of a need to accumulate physical items and goods, which I think was kind of freeing overall. Um, and being able to design a house around your family is also kind of interesting, right? Like how you live, you know what your family likes, you know what you want to do in the morning when you make breakfast, and suddenly instead of like having a house that you're modified, you're in the house that you thought about all those things and built out how you wanted.
Can you lead us through the design and like rebuilding process from a construction standpoint
I
of
mean,
what you went through?
yeah. So it was a year to get permits, which was incredibly frustrating. I lived at City Hall. I went to City Hall every day that it was open. Even if I didn't have anything to do at City Hall, I went to City Hall to make sure that they were aware that there were people who'd lost their homes, that were still waiting for them to do shit so we could rebuild. We didn't have a very defined process. You guys are definitely getting a more optimized process, but there's a lot of stupid. I had to have a biologist come and tell me that it was okay to build my house where my house had been for 60 years, and the biologist was only in City Hall 2 days a week. What, like, why? So there's
Wait
a
a
lot of
minute. What does the biologist tell you?
the biologist tells you whether or not like you could disturb the plants or whether there's some plant that you're not allowed to move that's in the way for building your house. I mean, there was that level of nonsense in the California coastal areas for building. If you bought a lot, trust me, you would meet the biologist. But in a rebuild, that doesn't make any sense at all. So like the start of it was like, hey, what kind of house we want to build? Hire an architect. That's hard. I mean, I don't know about you. I ran a process. I probably interviewed 20 people. Um, and then I did the whole like, oh, the really big and successful ones are going to get too busy. So I don't want to do that. That's dumb. And I narrowed it down to like 3 people. And I had like the really affordable guy who worked from home and loved sailing and really just wanted to do like 6 or 7 houses a year so he could take care of his kids and go sailing. Um, and then there was like this super technical guy that knew all the latest gee whiz, this material, and you do this and da 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 da. And he'd built a bunch of cool farmhouses in Austin that I liked, nice indoor outdoor lifestyles. And then there was like the crazy artist dude that was in his 70s who'd built like 100 houses in all over LA, basically every one of them different, every one of them sort of designed around um, the family that they were working with. Um,
Can I ask you a question about all that? So,
yeah,
as you're describing this process, I think of a few challenges. One is money. Did you have enough money to spend time at City Hall, to hire the architect, to get the construction going? And the other question is, did you build a home that was similar in square footage to the home that you had before? Because what we're being told in the Palisades fire is that they're going to streamline the permitting process as long as you don't add more than 10% of your original square footage. If you go over 10%, then it's going to take forever.
not forever, but longer. So no, I didn't have enough money, right? I mean, I was certain I was underinsured. I was assuming that I was taking all of the money from my policy, not just the structure money, all the contents money. One of the reasons we didn't buy stuff was like, no, we need all that money to build the house. Every dollar we get from the insurance company is going to be needed to build the house. Um, and so there was that concern. I was blessed with working for myself at the time and had been kind of in some slack time, spending a lot of my time with my kid. So I'd been on autopilot for a couple of years, so my days weren't overwhelmingly busy, um, which was first for me in my career, and that was kind of nice. So I had the time to go to City Hall and I could push my work late, and so I could do the house stuff during the day and the work stuff at night. Um, we did end up building a larger house. Uh, I saw it as an opportunity to build a larger house. We knew we were going to need a larger house. We were looking at having more kids. And if we were going to be out of the house for multiple years, then we should probably figure out how to build something else. And I assumed we were probably going to refinance the house and take equity out of it because we'd owned it for a long time at that moment. But that was sort of before we got into construction and all the rest of it. I was really dollar conscious in terms of the architect I hired. Cost was absolutely one of the concerns. One of the reasons I didn't go with any of the big names um, in terms of the people that were out there. Stylistically, the house is pretty different um, from what we had, and I built it. I don't know that you guys can do this, but I pulled permits for like plus 10%, so I could get started, and then I pulled permits for an addition on top of it.
Well, that's pretty smart. So you start out with the plus 10% process, and then you just do what you want to do once you've got those initial permits coming quickly.
Yeah. And we designed the house to support the addition. The addition was the second story. We engineered it for the second story. We didn't hide it from the city for what we were doing. We clearly marked like future expansion um, in terms of what was there, but all the calculations, all the structural, everything else was done.
Well, if nothing else, that's a really good thing to learn from this podcast. That's a really good strategy. Start out with the plus 10% and then create the room for something else you want to do if you have the vision and the money, I guess.
Yeah. And speak clearly, like investigate that there were challenges to that down the road. Like the first 2 years for rebuilds, people were able to do that. After that, some of those projects got challenged in terms of whether or not you could pull a permit for an addition before the original structure existed. But in the first couple of years, there's normally a lot of support, and if you think out of the box, you can do things like that.
How long did it take you, Jamie, from the moment that you from the moment of the fire until you started like building the house?
Almost a year to the day.
A year and a day?
Almost a year. Almost a year. It was a little more than a year. It was like 4 days longer than a year.
And the construction, how long did the construction take?
That took 3.5 years, but we had COVID in the middle of our construction, which I would not wish upon you. Also, my wife's not great at visualizing things, so there are certainly some changes that got made along the way that took up time as well. So I would say we should have been able to go a year faster than that. I had a really
And that a year,
three,
a year,
3.5 years.
yeah,
3.5 years, a year faster because of the vision or because of COVID?
because of COVID.
Got it.
supply
Got it.
constraints. I mean, we had to go to war to keep people working on our
Yeah.
site, right?
Yeah.
People kept trying to shut us down. Thankfully, Mountain's a small town, and it's easier for a relatively small number. Like a larger percentage of our population was impacted, so it was easy for us to go to City Hall collectively and say, absolutely not. Like we'll wear
And
masks and take tests and shit, but we're not going to stop building.
and when you rebuilt, I understand that you've built a lot more fire resistant,
Yeah,
structure. Can you talk us through that, the
sure.
logic, the cost, anything that can shed light?
I can speak for hours on this. So I'll try and be concise and give you the summary. I have a bad habit of going deeply down the rabbit hole on stuff like this. When it happens to me, my wife will tell you it will take me 9 months to buy a car. Um, so like I'm just that guy when it comes to stuff like this. I learned a lot. The first thing I learned is that we hear a lot about defensible space, but the truth is, if you look at the studies, it doesn't do a lot of meaningful things to help you. The things that help you, um, almost in order, because I just had to speak to this tonight, um, enclosed eaves, number one on the list. Like for different no, houses survived, houses don't survive, houses without
Enclosed
enclosed.
eaves?
Yes. So
What does
like if
that
you
mean?
so you know your roof comes down over the edge of the wall.
Hmm.
Old style of building, like that was just the framing and it was wood and it was exposed and it hangs down over. Um, and so that's open eaves in terms of what's there. Enclosed means you box that in some sort of fire resistant material like stucco or concrete board or concrete siding or
Wait,
whatever.
so the roof doesn't overhang the side of the house
It
anymore?
still does, but you enclose the part that overhangs, right? So instead of it just being wood on the bottom and roofing material on the top, which is like what open eaves are, it's actually enclosed in a fireproof, fire resistant material. There's no such thing as fireproof.
Interesting.
Um, but that's the number one. Number two is the vents, all the little openings you have to get into your crawl space, your attic, all the stuff you have to do so your house can breathe. Um, so that's the other way things get in. And there's these really cool vents now that should be code that aren't, that close. It's like a honeycomb metal and it's two different metals. So it flexes when it gets hot and the little honeycombs close. And so like you look at the vent and you can see through it. And then if you hold a blowtorch against it, it goes like it's alive or a robot or something and it just seals. And they're more expensive and people will try and tell you that's a reason not to use them, but then you ask and it's like, well, a normal vent's $12 and that one's 120 and you need 20 of them. Yeah, okay, fine. Like that's a relatively small expense compared to what you're doing overall in the house. Um, there's a lot of everybody wants to get away from wood um, framing because we all know wood burns, but the sheathing is what matters. So like frame your house in wood because it's fucking cheapest. Excuse my language. Yeah, but sheathe it in stucco or concrete siding or the fireproof material of your choice. If you're really stuck on having wood because you want a barn house look or whatever, then you put concrete board underneath it, and you put the wood on top, and the wood will just burn off and go away. Everybody was obsessed with steel roofs when we were building pressed steam steel roofs because they were in vogue architecturally as well. They cost about 120K. I roofed with a material called TPO, which is basically rubber. It's what you use on top of RVs, and it's what most modern architect builders like to use because it's super clean and easy to install. But I put 2 layers of concrete board underneath it, so if flaming things land on my roof, the rubber will melt, but it's not going to burn inside of my structure or cause it to catch on fire. So like these are the main elements. Local water storage, we put our own water storage in, pumps that work when the power's out, solar and battery, which has been, I've spent 4.5 weeks in the last 6 months on my batteries, thanks to the fires and wind events and the fact that Edison likes to turn the power off every time it gets windy out here. That's incredibly helpful. um, I've lived in fire area for a long time. Communication's important. We put Starlink up as backup ISP right away. So during this whole fire event, we were, like my Christmas lights were still on. I was watching Netflix, and I put up an old router as a public Wi-Fi for all my neighbors that didn't have internet connectivity. Um, so I built the house. Like I'm not leaving again. I built the house to be a comfortable place to shelter, um, and if there's another fire event here.
Let me ask you about the water system that you mentioned. You have your own storage and your own pumps. What kind of tank are you using? Is it above
Uh,
ground? Is it below ground?
I actually integrated into my landscape and did a ginormous water feature. So
Aha. So it's
I
like a pond or a pool or
yeah, it's basically a moat.
a moat.
It is between my house and where the fire came from, and it was designed to basically be part of the house and also happen to store about 6,000 gallons of water. So
Wait, part of the house, does it flow through your house? I ask this
no, it
because
doesn't. It doesn't flow, but like we
no.
faked some cantilever decks over it, so you kind of. I I spent a lot of time in Japan when I was younger, and I was always obsessed with the idea that you'd walk over a bridge or something to go into my house. And one of the you talk about the small joys of losing your house to a fire, like think about the things you've always wanted and figure out a way to do some of it. Like give yourself room to like get some of your fantasy elements into the house that'll make you happy because it's a long ass journey. Um,
There's a there's a house in the Hollywood area that was built by Frank Lloyd Wright about 115 years ago called Hollyhock House. And it's made of stucco and other things. And it actually has a water feature that in the original design was supposed to flow through the house.
yeah.
So there was one pond, I think, on one side, and then a river through the living room, and then it would come out the other side, and there was a pond on the other side of the house. I think from an engineering standpoint, it created too much moisture
In the house.
inside the interior of the house, so they've removed the water. But cool idea. I don't know if it helps fight fires, but really interesting.
It's a beautiful idea. There was a house in Solstice Canyon that burned a long time ago after it was abandoned. That was built by a student of Frank Lloyd Wright's that did the same thing. Um, they had and I was obsessed with it. Like I found the wreckage when I first started hiking in the Santa Monica's, and like found pictures of it. It was yeah. So, but you should, I picked the artistic architect too because I wanted to do something that I personally would enjoy. I work in a creative field. I'm used to designing things. I wanted to, if it was going to make a house, I wanted it to make me happy when I looked at it.
That's so cool. And you felt free enough to do that after this disaster? I mean, with all the other challenges, you thought, hey, I'm going to do this thing I always wanted to do. I always wanted a moat and a drawbridge or whatever.
The moat came later. The moat was definitely later as we got into it, and I had a better understanding of the process and what our finances would be and what that would all look like. I went back to work full time, and so our personal financial position also changed over the first year and a half or 2 years of building, in terms of what we could do and not do, which made things a little bit easier.
Has there been anything like from the fire perspective, from a fire resistance or anything other technologies that have come along the last like 5 to 7 years since the Woolsey Fire that if they had been in today, you would have used
Um,
back?
I don't think there's a lot since Wolsey that's changed. Certainly, there's some materials I've discovered since Wolsey. Like I found this really cool. I forget the name of it, but I can look it up for you guys. But it's a process where they take actual wood, um, and they super high pressure treat it in really, really, really strong vinegar. And after they do it, it's like UV proof, fireproof, termite proof, but it's a natural material. It's not some weird plasticky thing. It's not chemicals and so I was really obsessed when I found that. But the only factory that was still making it was in Europe, and the lead times for like I don't know 27 weeks or something stupid. And we were trying to finish up so we could move in, and I'm pretty certain my wife would have murdered me if I told her I was going to take an extra 2 months because I found different wood. Um,
Can I ask you, maybe you know about this, but straw bale homes, I've heard people say that they're fireproof, but I happen to know someone whose house was made of straw bales and it burnt down. I don't know if it burnt down because of the straw bales, but there was a story that it's a natural material and it doesn't allow fire to spread somehow. Didn't prevent the fire at my friend's house, but
I
do you know
didn't.
anything
I
about
didn't
that?
look. I did not look at straw barrel. I mean, I vaguely know what it is. I know it's normally used in cold climates because I spent a lot of time in the mountains, and like that's an interesting way to build because of the size of the straw bales. If you're in a really cold climate, I've never heard it referred to as fireproof. I just the fact that it's straw would make me slightly skeptical of that, although it
Right.
is enclosed. Um, there have been some good changes in insulation materials and stuff. Like there's some really interesting natural materials you can use for insulation and interior walls that I think are pretty cool.
I can see the other guys want to ask something, but I have one more question I have to ask
Sure.
about this design element.
Sure.
There's an urban myth that things that are painted blue don't burn. What color is your new house?
It is white. So not blue.
Okay.
It's a good myth.
There is a house, Jamie, down a few houses from you, that is blue, and
It's blue.
it looks like it's from before the fire, right?
It was the same. There are several houses, including the one you live in, where people put up exactly the same house. And I got to say, I didn't understand that at all. I was like, what, how? Okay, sure, it's fine. But people are attached to their things. That house was blue before it burned too. So that's the
Ah,
same
so that's
color
a
blue
new.
it
That
was
blue
previously.
house is a new house.
It is a new house, and
Okay.
it is exactly the same as the old house.
So
So
the blue
it's,
burned down, John.
yeah. Yeah, the Bluebird. The only house, the two houses that survived on our end of the street had both been through major remodels and both had closed the eaves, and had actually both put steel roofs in. But roofing material is important. Like I said, the enclosed eaves probably top the list, and you have to do that now. But if you're in an older home and you're in a fire area and you're wondering like, what's the first thing I should do to make my house less likely to burn? That's it.
Did you guys have any
Quick question. Sorry, I
issues
lied.
with?
That wasn't my last question. Ceramic shingles.
Yeah.
What do you think about those?
You mean the modern ones? You mean like the Satillo tile ones, like the
Yeah.
old school Spanish ones? I mean, they're both good from a fireproof standpoint, but the Spanish ones, and I don't have a lot of data on this, but my understanding is because they have the little rounded thing,
Mhm.
burning embers can get trapped under
Ah.
there, which is what you're trying to avoid. So those aren't so great. That said, on La Costa Beach in Malibu, the only building that survived on either side of the freeway corridor was like a 1940s thing that was part of the beach club that had exactly that tile roof. So, and you're talking about like $100 million mansions burned down the road from it. So maybe there's something to be said for that.
Did you guys
Some
have
of it is
any
somebody
issues
has to
with
be there.
the?
Sorry.
Sorry, did you guys have any issues with water pressure when you came to like rebuild your houses because you build like a bigger house? I heard it like because you're building a bigger house now you need more pressure and a
We
lot
had
of
to
people.
we had to get a bigger meter, which cost more and was frustrating and annoying. Um, we had to pay part of the upgrade. The way the water districts work is like if there have been upgrades since your house was built and you get new service, you have to pay your pro rata share for whatever those upgrades cost when they put them in. So like when I went to go get my meter, I think the guy was like, "That'll be $9,422," and I was like, I'm sorry, what?" Like I had water before. Like how is that? But the way water districts works, like when their infrastructure upgrades, then people who build the new stuff pay for it. But then if you go to rebuild, you have to contribute to that. So that was frustrating. We did have a flow problem for our sprinklers. One of the most painful points of me rebuilding is they make you put sprinklers in the house. Um, and I had to put like 37 sprinklers all over my gorgeous flat white ceilings with their stupid little covers on them, which was twice as many as we originally thought. And then there's not enough water pressure, so I had to buy a $15,000 pump to increase the water pressure. And somewhere in the back of your head, when your house burned down from a brush fire and no firemen were there, and you're talking to the fire guy, you're like, "Bro, my house is not burning down from something burning inside the house. It burned down from what burns down outside, and apparently you don't show up. So like, I really don't care what you think." Like, I just want to build my house again. But these were like some of the more annoying points along the way in terms of what's there. So look, I mean, after that, you hire an architect, you hire a builder, and you're off the races. I went the hard way. I did half of my own general contracting work. I put a GC under a retainer and worked with him, but we picked all the subs together. I was on site every day. Like I moved my office here as soon as there was power, which freaked everybody out. I was like, "Yeah, no, my office is going to be like right here in this little." I bought a container, shipping container, and put a roll-up door in it so I could look out and see everybody and move my desk in and my laptop in. And pretty much it was like, "Nope, I'm here. And if you have questions or you screw up or whatever, like we're going to deal with that in real time. We're not going to wait until the next meeting." So.
And did you have any issues with the soil report? I'm hearing a lot of people after the fire in 2018 like went ahead and did the soil report, and they tell them, oh, okay, you have a little bit of zinc, a little bit of this. Continue scraping and like taking out dirt. Now, not only you take out dirt, now you need to bring in new dirt where you're throwing all this dirt. So for you guys, it was like I think 800 houses or 1,000 houses, right?
There's
We
1,000
have
houses, yeah.
yeah, so we have like 8,000 or 9,000. I don't even know where they're going to bring all the earth, the dirt that we need to put
The,
in.
there's always dirt, man. One of the things I learned is like most construction exports dirt. And so like the dirt guys are always desperate for dump sites. Like if you need dirt, like you get a phone number and you call the guy and the trucks will keep coming until you're like, whoa, I don't need more dirt. Stop. Gotta go away. So like that'll be pretty readily available. We did have to scrape the lot. We passed after the first inspection. I have young kids at the time and we were planning on having more kids. I had the whole acre tested, not just the area. Um, that was the burn site and the apron. I was like, okay, but like, what about the rest of it? Like, I should know that doesn't have lead or lithium or mercury in it too. Um, so we tested everywhere. We didn't really have any other problems. I had to do a little cleanup. I had an airstream in my backyard that was like a little bit of extra space for us that we had restored, and there was some toxic junk where that burned too. So we scraped out a little extra dirt there. They did make us do this what I thought was a really dumb thing called remove and recompact, where R&R, where I had to dig down 5 feet where my foundation used to be and 5 feet around the outside of my house and take that dirt away and then bring in new dirt
Yeah,
and compact it. And the explanation I got for that was like, well, the dirt you had was an engineered fill, so we don't know if it'll stand up geologically. Which again, like your house has been there since 1960. You're like, I don't. What are you talking about, right? Like my house was just fine on the old dirt. We can build the new house on the old dirt. So that was frustrating, and then it's like $16,000 in my mind that I just threw away for stuff that didn't need to be done.
You know what's interesting about that is that they really did use different materials several decades ago to fill things in. There's a problem on Temescal Canyon Drive or Boulevard or whatever it is, the road coming up from PCH on Temescal, which connects to Sunset. And everyone's been saying that it's a sinkhole because they see all this water and there were cracks in the road. The road's still closed right now. I learned this week from a geologist that the reason there was water on Temescal was when they built the road, they filled it with dirt and material that was basically derived from clay. So it's not permeable to water. And that's the narrowest point of Temescal Canyon. And so when you get a lot of rain, there's nowhere for the water to go. And so the road starts flooding. Now they would use a sand-based fill, which is permeable to water. So the water underneath the asphalt can still be absorbed further down. So I get that it's frustrating, but maybe that's the reason they have rules like that, because things were used, materials were used in the 60s and 70s that just weren't right. And we know that today, unfortunately, probably through trial and error.
It's not, I mean, that I can tell you, like, I can't tell you what was there. I think that's the problem, is they couldn't tell what was there either. And what they wanted was dirt that had been tested by your geologist, because you'll have a geologist on your team too. One things I didn't know. And an archaeologist, yay. But
Whoa, you had an archaeologist?
yeah, because we did excavation and we live in an area where there might be Chumash artifacts. So like when they're digging, we had to have an archaeologist.
Did you find any?
No. You don't want to find any, because then you become a cultural site and they shut your whole job down.
Wow.
Yeah. So that would be bad. But yeah, they didn't know what it was, and that their answer was, we want dirt that we know has been tested and will do these things. And it looked a lot like degenerate or DG that you use for paths and stuff, what they hauled in to compact.
You mentioned earlier that most of your street, your neighborhood has been rebuilt.
Mm-hmm.
Does the community feel the same as it did before the fire?
No.
How has it changed?
I lived on what was, one of the oldest streets on Point Doom. I mean, they used to call it the ghetto of Point Doom because it was mostly unremodeled homes from 1960, lots of second and third generation families, fourth generation. My son's best friend's fourth generation family in the same home and just finishing their rebuild, which really is, a nice way of saying it was affordable. And as a result, a lot of those folks couldn't afford to rebuild. A lot of them were senior citizens and didn't live to see their houses rebuilt. We saw some developers come in. We didn't have any second homes on our street before the fire. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 on our street now, in terms of what's there. So that's different. So some of that fabric's gone. There's still enough of it that it's the right street, but it definitely is different. The housing prices are much higher because not only did my house, like all the houses are new, and LA people like that, right? It's a shiny new thing. The neighborhood's all new. So there was a premium actually on the street. It went from being one of the least expensive streets on Point Doom to being probably other than the bluff front stuff, being one of the most expensive streets on Point Doom to buy on.
Jamie, what kind of advice would you give people that are going through this with families? You mentioned you have young kids. Everybody probably has their own lives, their own community.
Yep.
It's one of the things I think me, Oren, and Joel are dealing with as well.
Yep. Look, we made it a point to try and keep consistency in my son's life. Like we had one kid at the time. He was 3 when it burned, turned 4 shortly thereafter. And so, I kept him in the same preschool, even though it was a 45-minute drive in both directions for me, because I didn't want him to have new friends. I wanted him to have the same friends. He liked his preschool. He had a great time in his preschool. We knew all the teachers. We trusted the school. So little things like that helped a lot. We would deliberately, for birthday parties and stuff, like import his 3 best friends, and make sure that they were coming, so that even though we were in a different neighborhood, like we moved to Calabasas basically for the first 9 months, 10 months, we would make sure that we got his best friends to come and be part of it. I kept him involved in the process. I took him to all the meetings with me with city. I took him to the architectural meetings. I showed him the plans and explained to him what plans, not that he really understood, but it's still like, we made it father-son time. And I had to do the work anyway, so I might as well spend time with my kid while I'm doing it. He'll learn stuff. I think that was kind of an important part for him, because instead of it happening to him, like he felt like he was participating in the whole process. I think my strangest experience with my son is we hadn't shown him the house after it burned. It was hard for me to see it. I don't want to do it to him. And I was driving him home from preschool, and he was pretty spatially aware and learning navigation and stuff. So he was always looking out the window and asking me questions. And we were at the turnoff from PCH onto Heather Cliff. And he's like, "Daddy, that's where our house was." And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Well, I want to go see it." And I was like, I don't think that's so great, man. Like, I don't think you want to see it. And he's like, "No, Daddy, I need to see it." And I was like, "Are you sure? Like, is that something you really want to do right now? I don't think it's a very happy thing to do. I don't think you're gonna like it, just to be honest." And he's like, "No, I feel like I need to." And I was like, "Okay." And so like I had wondered when I was going to show him the house, and then like he just told me when he was ready to go see it. And we had a really weird emotional time walking around the house looking at burnt shit. And I'm a closet photographer, so I took some photos that are probably still pretty important to my wife and I of the day. But like we didn't ever, like after that we decided not to insulate him from it, to make him an active participant in it. I think that was a big help, in terms of what's there. He came to all my build and review meetings. He sat through my wife and I arguing over stucco colors. Like, there's all those things that came with it. And I do think that helps quite a bit.
So the property values are higher. That's good news, I guess, if you live in the Palisades or Malibu and you're wondering if the neighborhood's just going to disappear. Did you feel that you lost control of your community? Because that's another issue. Many people in the Palisades are very suspicious of the city of Los Angeles, LA County, the state. What do they want for us? They're going to force all kinds of housing developments on us.
You have every right. If I lived in your neighborhood, I would have all the same concerns, given how the city and state and county have acted over the last decade and a half. I don't think you're going to see a lot of radical change, but as a community, I would sure as heck keep an eye on it, and be quick to inundate people with emails, letters, podcasts, newspaper articles. PR is your friend. Politicians don't like to look bad. Um, I do think you have to be wary of that. I don't think here we were ever really that much at risk of it because we're such a small community. I think we had the opposite problem. We were on our own. The state didn't want to help us. The county barely wanted to help us. Getting the fire department's attention to get, that part of your plans done was like, oh, you need to drive to Downey. And it's like, well, why do I need to drive to Downey? Like, what? Like, that seems like a waste of my day. Um, and so, like, I think that we actually had the opposite problem. Sometimes getting attention from the larger entities was an issue. And then we did not have the Coastal Commission stuff waived, so there was a lot of trepidation around what Coastal would do and not do and could be allowed to do.
So did the community come together in the Woolsey Fire, or it sounds like there's two sides of it, and some of it did, some of it didn't, and then can you walk us down that path?
Immediately in the aftermath, the community absolutely came together. Like, one of the reasons I like Malibu is that most people live out here to be left alone right up until there's a problem, and that they'll do anything for you to help you. So you might barely know your neighbor's name, but you know his car because like that car belongs in your street. And if you saw smoke, you would run into his house and try and rescue him and his family without thinking about it. When the fire comes, everybody helps themselves here. We brought generators in. They locked us out for weeks. We ran boats from Ventura and Marina Del Rey to get around roadblocks to bring supplies in. Like, we're not really good at listening to, no, you can't be on your property. That's like, okay, dude, well, I'm going to do that anyway. And so I think as a community, that part was great. I think when we got to the rebuild process, it got harder because there was a lot of fear that, like, you guys are worried about low income housing. Out here, everybody's worried about mansionization because like old Malibu had burned, the old, still 1,600 square foot, 2,000 square foot ranch homes had burned up. And what they didn't want to see was a bunch of 7,000 square foot modern cookie cutter things.
And did that happen? I mean, where you live, did you have that problem in the end?
No, in the end, we didn't. We did a pretty good job of shutting it out. If anything, if you were like me and you wanted to expand your house, you had the opposite problem where you actually had to get into fights with people just to be able to add a bedroom. It's like, man, I'm not making a mansion. I'm adding a master suite. Like, there are differences. And so there was some of that. And we did have some developers who came in. Like, we had some nutty dude who came in his McLaren, talking about what law firm he worked for, and he just bought this property and was going to build a 12,000 square foot thing, and he was doing his whole sort of LA rich guy speech for those of us on the cul-de-sac, and he drove away, and we all looked at each other. We're like, not on this street, bro. I'm glad you think that's your plan, but we're organized and vocal here. That ain't happening. And he's building a nice 4,000 square foot 2-story home now, which is fine, right? Like, nobody cares about that. We're on big lots out here and stuff, but we don't want to hear like 11,000 square foot 14 car garage. That's just not our community.
So how long were you away for while all this rebuilding was going on? Because they've told us it could be years, as you've mentioned, traffic, construction noise, trucks, all kinds of stuff.
I mean, so we were actually going to end up living on our property the last 9-10 months to year, because we were running out of rental coverage, and we had done a lot with the house and we're bleeding money. And in the middle of all that, I own a small rental property that I've had forever. That's a little condo, and my tenants of 14 years decided to move out in the middle of that. And I was like, I can't pay rent and mortgage. And so we moved into the little, 2-bedroom condo for the last year.
Jamie, you mentioned that there was like lots of time. We know that during the Woolsey Fire, there were some lawsuits happening as well. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit through that and how that impacted the community? What happened?
Yeah, look, that was one of the other things that made things easier for most of us. Ultimately, Edison, I don't think they admitted responsibility for the fire, but took responsibility for the fire, and entered into settlement agreements with the people who had losses, and that certainly was a huge aid for many of the people. We were, most of the community was underinsured, and so that's one of the reasons why only 37% of the people are back. and I know there's another 200 houses under construction right now, still from Wolsey. It took 3 or 4 years for those settlements to work out and to get through the process. Um, but the fact that there was a party that took financial responsibility for it was a huge help in terms of getting us back.
Can you talk a little bit, Jamie, about like how you guys got together? How did it help you with like getting together? Did it help you at all in the building process, or it just help you in like I know that you told me you guys were able to negotiate a couple of the law firms, and when you came as a group, any
Yeah.
tips for us for
Look, we organized. We used the Facebook group. I invited you guys to join as kind of one of the points of organization. And so like some of that was like, what do we need from the planning department and from the city to make our lives easier, and how does that work? And some of it was like, hey, it looks like there's going to be some lawsuits against Edison, and there are a bunch of really kind of sharky contingency law firms circling around, and many of us either have a lot of experience dealing with lawyers or are lawyers. And so we kind of divided up work, and 2 lawyers went and interviewed firms and vetted them, and picked 4 that they thought were capable of handling the litigation and deal with us fairly, and then negotiated group pricing in terms of what was there. And as a result, so many people went with those firms that all the other firms that were involved that weren't part of that matched the pricing because their clients were leaving, right? Like, do you want to pay 30%, 25%, or 21% of the money you may be entitled to? Those are, when you're cash strapped and you're trying to rebuild your house and recover those lives, those are very simple questions to answer. And so that was a big part of it. And then even for building, like, we shared tips on subcontractors. We got together on our cul-de-sac and we hired one geological firm to do all of the houses, and we negotiated preferred pricing with them. We did similar things with like the soils guy who has to come around and drive his little stick into the ground to tell you whether or not you're compacted enough that you can start building. I say that sarcastically. I know it's important, but it's just like when you're experiencing it, literally, like you're paying a bulldozer to drive around in circles, and some guy every hour walks out with a little stick and taps it into the ground and goes and walks away, and the bulldozer starts driving again. You're like, what are we doing? Okay. But the that was helpful. Just sharing tips like, oh, I did this and this worked. I did this and this worked. Oh, I had this conversation with the city, or I had this conversation with the fire department. Encouraging that honest discourse. One of the things we kept for the group that I'm one of the admins for is you have to have lost your house to be in it. Like, we didn't want any vendors in it. We didn't want friends or my sister-in-law, or like, you emotionally have to be going through the same stuff we're going through. You can't be in here. Lots of other places you can be helpful, just not here. And it made it a place that was really easy to be honest, psychologically, emotionally, financially, about all the stuff that you were dealing with. It's interesting to watch too. Some people are hyper organized and create Excel documents and giant like to-do lists and like share them all. And I look at them and I'm like, I couldn't, like, in a million years I couldn't use that thing. I got Post-it notes all over my monitor that are color coded. But people all have their own way of organizing tasks. We got the idea because right after the fire, there was a Ventura group that was helping them rebuild from the fire, and they invited a couple of us into it. And they were super helpful because they had just been through like what we were about to go through. And so that was really helpful. I think earlier you asked me, like, in the first 6 weeks, what I wish I knew. I think the number one thing is it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. Like, take time to make like decisions. Take time to take care of yourself and your family. There's not a lot you can do to make it go faster. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's work to do and you got to do all the stuff, but you also, need your life and all of that. You can't just push it away. And it's going to be there for a long time. So you got to figure out a way to live with it, as opposed to just trying to get through it as quickly as possible.
So with the few minutes we have left, just looking back on this whole experience, I'm just checking out the map here. The Woolsey Fire was about 4 times the size of the Palisades Fire, which is kind of incredible. Yeah. 96,000 acres or something, 97,000, something like that.
Yeah.
And the Palisades Fire was just shy of 24,000. So that's massive. And yet you guys recovered And how do you feel about it overall? What's your feeling about it? And what would you say to people who've gone through the Palisades fire in Pacific Palisades in Malibu that would give them a sense of perspective?
Yeah. I guess it's hard for me to distill it down. It's a very complex thing, right? You have a lot of emotions about it. Sometimes it's a positive thing, sometimes it's a negative thing. Um, I think the first thing I would say is you have to decide if you want to rebuild or not. It takes a lot of work, takes a lot of patience, takes a lot of time, energy. But if your community and your home and where you live are important to you, then it's definitely doable. It's not impossible. It's really just a time and money equation. Um, Lots of people build houses, right? It's not open heart surgery or something, it isn't the worst thing in the world to be dealing with, as much as it might feel like that in the moment. And then I said earlier, you have to find joy in it. Like if you're not gonna do the little things that'll make you like the house or have fun while you're doing things. I took my son out of school to put his handprints and footprints in the foundation of my house. Like, you have to like make the moments that are parts of your life part of it, and take those away from it. But it does come back. I mean, the other thing, you started off this podcast showing us stuff, about wildlife and what's going on in the mountains. I've lived in fire country and been through, I think this is the 5th or 6th major fire I've been through. The mountains don't need you to do anything, man. They grow back. Chaparral comes back so fast. In 2 years, that park will look, your trails will still be gone, or you'll have to rebuild those, but everything else will look great. You're going to have an amazing wildflower season. You're going to see things that you haven't seen before. If you're an avid, like, I love being in the Santa Monica's, and after fires, you see some of the most special moments imaginable, um, things that you would only see because the fire was there. And I guess I try and bring that into like my own experience with it in terms of rebuilding. Like I'm getting to do things that would only happen as a result of a pretty big tragedy. Um, yeah.
Sounds amazing. Ron and Oren, do you guys have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's great to have somebody like Jamie over here. You can hear the positive at almost at every piece of the process, and how you can take something that right now or like from a month ago look like, oh my God, how are we going to get out of it? And to make it into something very positive, like the whole process of what you talked about, like taking your son with you. That's what I did, like from day one. I think the second day I told my son, okay, open your software that you play with and start designing your room. See what you really want to have in your room. And
Yeah.
he for the first like week and a half or 2 weeks, he was very excited about it. It's like I think it was got him out of like the first shock. And I think it's great, Jeremy. There was a lot of like great advice that we could use. And again, we hear like a lot of horror stories, and I'm happy to hear stories like yours, that people that were able to rebuild better, and went through this and enjoyed the process.
Yeah, it's a common theme. It's very comforting to hear some of those words. By the way, what kind of car do you drive? Because if you do that kind of research on cars, I need to know.
Oh.
I've been a Porsche guy most of my adult life.
Okay.
I lost two in the fire, but I brought one back to life because it's the first one I bought myself, and it was the one thing that like I deemed unacceptable to lose. Like it was that was the thing that almost broke me emotionally because I thought it survived, and then I went and got it, and the front end had melted, and the insurance company was like, "We're going to total it," and I was like, "No,
Yeah.
like nobody's taking my car away from me. It's the only thing I have left. It's mine. First nice thing I bought myself. I'm getting that back."
Did
and I
you
did.
did you fix it yourself, or did you? No.
No,
Okay.
I mean, I did little work on it, but nothing like this. We just had to negotiate with the insurance company and get around to not totaling it, and then I got it back and blew the engine and got to spend a lot more money on it.
That's the one you were driving on Sunday?
Yeah, my
Oh,
wife won.
I saw.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
literally that was my daily driver for that car. Has almost 300,000 miles on it. It was just like one of those things that I own that like I don't ever plan on parting with. So it's nice it survived.
Very nice.
Well, Jamie, Ottilie, thank you so much for joining us on the Three Homeless Guys podcast and sharing your experience with the Woolsey Fire. And we have so many other incredible episodes coming up. I mentioned the environmental episode that we're planning. There's going to be one about education, lots more about insurance, so many other things. Guys, what am I leaving out? We talked about so many ideas this week.
Real estate we're working on. Yeah, everything that's like everything that people are asking about and is going to be coming up. So we do get mail. We look at all of it. Please send us your ideas because we plan on just hitting all of those spots. Just wait for that time before your kind of like subject comes up. But we're taking notes and we're trying to push out as many pods as we can.
pod@threehomelessguys.com is the email address. And thanks once again for an incredible episode of Three Homeless Guys. Until next time, stay strong and carry on.
Thanks for listening to Three Homeless Guys. If this episode hit home, please subscribe to our channel. Check out threehomelessguys.com for RSS feeds to your favorite streaming service. Follow us on social and share this with a friend who needs to hear it. Drop us a review or shoot us a message at pod@threehomelessguys.com. We'd love to hear from you. Stay strong, and we'll catch you next time.